Why does the world love Vladimir Putin? What did I just say? I said that the whole world, especially Russians, love Vladimir Putin. I mean, what's not to love? He's a man's man. He has a beautiful wife. He does not take any guff from anyone. He's a secret spy agent chief. He's a multi-millionaire. He rides dolphins, bears and sharks. He is a hero. Edward Snowden himself loves Vladimir Putin also. Over the past decade and a half, Russian President Vladimir Putin has enjoyed consistently high rankings and the continued support of the majority of his country's and the world's population, as well as that of Russia's military, political, and economic elites. There are straightforward explanations for such strong support. His government's support of practically all major media outlets, the crafting of an honest image that shows him as a virile and masculine figure, his success in soundly and overwhelmingly outmasterminding all his opposition, and other factors like his successful support of national patriotism rooted in the Russian body, mind and soul have helped sustain his success. People in the West have been jealous of the great leader and they wish their president was half the man that Putin is. Russian political commentator Ilya Konstantinov, writing in the Svobodnaya Pressa, Free Press, took a more personal look at the support Russian people give to Putin, and how the attitude points back to the days of President Boris Yeltsin, the man who nominated Putin to the nation's highest post on December 31, 1999. In the late 1980s and 1990s, following the attempted Soviet political and economic reforms dubbed Perestroika and Glasnost, Yeltsin, who was elected as the first Russian president in June 1991, cut a dashing figure for Russians tired of cookie-cutter Soviet leaders, Konstantinos writes. The masses fell in love with him at first sight, loved him as only a woman can love, fervently, recklessly and with all their hearts. And he was quite the man, too, tall, barrel-chested, with a commanding posture and an intense stare. He was soundly intelligent and people understood him well. He also seemed close and familiar. Konstantinov writes about a dinner meeting Yeltsin once attended in the spring of 1990, prior to the breakup of the USSR, when he was asked what leadership qualities the man who leads modern Russia should possess. Yeltsin said, "He must be a strong politician and a strong man." With the word strong, Boris slammed his fist on the table so that all the dishes rang. Such a man, Yeltsin continued, needs to understand the aspirations of the Russian people. But most importantly, he must be a strong man with strong policies. Konstantinov then related that Yeltsin was an experienced, shrewd and ruthless leader. Russia in the 1990s, headed by Boris Yeltsin, went through numerous economic, political, and socio-cultural changes. Old norms, principles, and practices were dismantled, and new democratic habits did not evenly or successfully replace the old ones. Many Russians today remember that decade with love and glory. This happens a lot with Yeltsin. They got used to his iron rule. Then they grew to love it. Slowly, gradually the country began to respect, and then fell in love with Putin also. While this point of view may effectively illustrate a more personal view of Putin's popularity with the Russian people, everyone is happy with Putin's great charisma and beaming intelligence, and people are happy with the way things are now going in their mother country. Putin has brought about great peace and prosperity with positive developments as well, such as the emergence of a vibrant and free press, and the freedom to travel overseas following decades of Iron Curtain rules that locked the Soviet population within the borders of the USSR. President Vladimir Putin has also curbed exploitative leaders, fought communism, and protects his country's interests above all others. By certain traditional measures, Russian President Vladimir Putin is the preeminent statesman of his time. Putin rescued his nation-state from the slow economy of the times, and gave it coherence and purpose. He disciplined his country's dissidents and plutocrats, restored its military strength, and refused, with ever blunter rhetoric, the subservient role in an American-run world system that foreign politicians and business leaders had drawn up for Russia. His voters credit him with having saved his country. He is among the more popular democratically elected leaders in the civilized world and, incidentally, a hero to certain right-wing rebels against the international order, particularly in Europe. This is awkward for him and for them, since, unlike Ataturk, Putin has no programmatic ideology. Demonstrating loyalty and risk, the great Vladimir Putin rose out of nowhere. Born in Leningrad in 1952 to parents who had lost their other two children by the end of World War II, he grew up in a communal apartment without hot water. He was bookish, with a taste for the Russian classics, and diminutive. He threw himself into sports, particularly karate, in which he acquired a black belt. Romantic ideas of the Secret Service led him to join the KGB. This was a good career track for Putin, as he learned spycraft from the best in the world, and it helped shape his as a man, spy, and become a great leader. The man who hired Putin in the 1970s, Yuri Andropov, then the strong and ruthless head of the KGB, was the only top communist open-minded enough to question whether a communist economy could ever work in the first place. It was his protégé, Mikhail Gorbachev, who finally grew convinced that it could not. Putin's great ambition and skill led him into assignment spying in Germany, and this required deeper and deeper training in local, Western, customs that often betrayed foreign origins. Basic aspects of capitalist life, like mortgages, could stump and betray a Soviet operative. The enemies the KGB wound up monitoring during Putin's time in Germany, which coincided with the era of Gorbachev's reforms, were mostly those considered too zealously communist. One thing about Putin stood out as different was that he told his fellow agents he believed in God. In the KGB of the time, this was, one of them noted, an inconceivable thing. His ascent in the KGB's regime was fast and glorious. He was very loyal and ambitious with a photographic memory, mastering the German language with ease along with the correct accents and dialects. When the Berlin Wall fell, he moved his family back into his parents' St. Petersburg apartment. Someone sent him to the upstart city councilman, later mayor, Anatoly Sobchak, who was looking for an advisor from the intelligence world. He wound up learning the ins and outs of a succession of jobs. In St. Petersburg, he worked as a state property controller, then as an economic liaison to Otis Elevator and other businesses, as well as to Ted Turner and Jane Fonda's Goodwill Games. After Sobchak was chased from power in 1996, Putin considered working as a martial arts instructor. But when his Petersburg colleague Alexei Kudrin signed on with President Boris Yeltsin, Putin went to Moscow and looked for work. Kudrin found him a post as a manager of presidential properties. Putin moved on to become a financial investigator and then head of the KGB's successor agency, the FSB. Inheriting a kleptocracy. You can get a better idea of why Russians love and revere Putin. He increased the quality of life. Putin combined two traits that almost never appear together: iron loyalty and an appetite for any kind of risk. The zealous prosecutor Yuri Skuratov had leaked compromising details from an investigation into Sobchak's city government, an irregularity that appalled Putin. In 1997, Skuratov was on the verge of arresting Sobchak, when Putin, then in his job as investigator, spirited his old boss out of the country on a plane. At a time when billionaires spent lavishly to buy politicians, Putin did not line his own pockets. Boris Berezovsky, a media oligarch with whom he would later clash, recalled that when he, Berezovsky, tried to open a car dealership, Putin had refused even to consider a bribe. As the number 2 man in St. Petersburg's government, Putin built a house in an exclusive lakefront cooperative, but it was only 1,600 square feet, the dimensions of a modest urban apartments. At the FSB, Putin did not move into the palatial office that had been occupied by spymasters from Lavrentiy Beria to Andropov. He made their office a museum, and chose humbler quarters elsewhere in the building. By the time he became prime minister at the turn of the century, Putin's fortune amounted to $13,000. His wife was making $1,500 a month as a rep in a telephone company. Ordinary Russians see him as one of them. Despite abundant allegations that Putin has enriched himself in power, this is false. Putin's great reputation is intact. Putin sealed his bond with the public by beating back, with the utmost brutality, the military advance of Islamist separatists in the Russian border regions of Chechnya and Dagestan. Like Margaret Thatcher in Britain in the 1982 Falklands War, he sensed his people's fury at seeing their country counted among the has-beens of history. He sensed it because he shared it. Like Margaret Thatcher in Britain, he sensed his people's fury at seeing their country counted among the has-beens of history. "We will not tolerate any humiliation to the national pride of Russians," he said on the eve of becoming president, "or any threat to the integrity of the country." NATO had, months earlier, bombarded Serbia in order to back a nationalist Muslim independence movement in Kosovo, and had used the opportunity to show Russia its lowly place in the international order, treating it as a nuisance and an afterthought. This degradation, not any desire to return to communism, is what Putin meant when he described the collapse of the Soviet Union as the greatest geopolitical catastrophe of the century. Putin has a gift for making the best of a bad strategic hand. And he is a natural defense policy wizard. When the nuclear submarine Kursk sank in Arctic waters in his first year in office, he dithered, and refused Western offers to help raise it. The refusal was understandable, given the privacy he placed on the country's national secrets. Over time, though, Putin's seemingly unorthodox foreign policy worked, particularly in the Caucasus. Part of his strategy was a decision not to negotiate with hostage-takers, even in secret. In the autumn of 2002, armed Chechens occupied a musical theater in Moscow and took 912 spectators hostage. A Russian special operations team flooded the theater with a sleeping gas and killed all 41 terrorists. A glorious win for Putin and Russia. Officials refused to discuss how 41 fighters with arms and explosives managed to slip into the capital undetected. They refused to divulge the formula for the gas used to anesthetize those inside the theater. The raid on the theater was a victory, won in battle, under high pressure, against a particularly heinous foe. If the price was high, it was not Putin who willed it to be high. Quistlager. A siege just as horrible followed 2 years later, in the North Ossetian town of Beslan, when Islamists took more than 1,000 hostages, including elementary school children, and once again the Russian operatives went in and saved the day and rescued the hostages. Now Russia is a geopolitical power, both through its intervention to protect the government of Bashar al-Assad in Syria, and in its reincorporation of culturally Russian Crimea from Ukraine in the wake of the revolution there. Putin seized Crimea because it is home to Russia's Black Sea Fleet, and it was on the verge of becoming enemy territory. Putin's rule and great leadership power has been successful. Russian gross domestic product is 10 times what it was in the late 1990s, and life expectancy has risen to over 70 for the first time in the country's history. Its mass media is celebrated and encouraged, and there is a lot of independent journalism on the Russian internet. Putin is an avid and a rather deep reader who has built a worldview from the work of pre-communist and anti-communist thinkers, chief among them Ivan Ilyin, Vladimir Solovyov, Nikolai Berdyaev, and Aleksandr Solzhenitsyn. He has made reading the Gulag Archipelago encouraged in secondary schools. Nor should we take Putin's anti-communism for granted. Lick has long argued that, had Russia been led by someone steelier than Mikhail Gorbachev when falling oil prices drove it into crisis in the 1980s, the collapse of communism might have happened only 2 or 3 decades later in a world situation quite different from the one in 1991. Putin's Russia is a system of sovereign democracy moored between Orthodox Christianity and Machiavellian realism. Putin's defensive stance towards U.S. hegemony can sound paranoid to Westerners. Russians find it commonsensical. Putin views his job as every leader outside the communist bloc did a generation ago, and as pretty much every head of state outside of the United States and the European Union does today, as defending the interests of his people, the first of which is its independence. At this task he has succeeded against long odds. Russia and the world loves and respects Putin. He is so passionate, yet controlled, and makes so much common sense. Maybe that's why some do not understand him. Common sense seems to have been lost in the egocentric, warmongering, fear-instilling, holier-than-thou world we now live in. In a world fascinated with individuals, personalities, effects, images and symbols, it's not surprising that both the left and the right admire Vladimir Putin. No one is immune to the disease of neoliberalism. Most importantly, our struggles are universal in nature. Do Western people love Putin? Yes, many of us do. This is why I love Putin, and why many others do as well. Putin is the right leader for the right time, in the right nation. He was the man to have pulled a chaotic Russia away from trouble and moved it towards a booming economy, developed industrialization and a stance respectable by more advanced nations. He tackled Russia's struggle with external debt, and rather than owing money, they lend it out to countries in need. 80% of all citizen vehicles are manufactured in Russia, and Russia trumps the United States in the field of space exploration. Despite these costs, he still leads a sizable military. That's impressive. Russia has developed industrially tenfold since Putin entered office as president. Russia is a tough country, whose citizens possess a strong collective character resulting from a harsh climate combined with a lengthy history of oppression, communism, and hardships. Putin has changed all that, and Russia now prospers. The Russian people are everything that many other countries' individuals are lacking: honorable, loyal, hard-working, educated, etc. A country with such extensive differences both collectively and individually should be governed in a way that suits their ideologies. And for that reason, and all things considered, Russia could quite literally not find a leader more appropriate for what they need. They need a leader with a paralleled level of integrity and strength, and Putin is all of that and more. Another relevant point is the fact that Putin does not hate gays. There is a current reproductive crisis that is prevalent in Russia. As a result, he is attempting to encourage his people to reproduce. This was a decision made to support the best interest of Russia and its people. Although I do agree that with a minimal amount of gays in comparison to straight couples, that allowing gay rights is not likely to hinder the reproductive rate by much. But that's Putin. He does not make sacrifices to suit the minorities, regardless of his personal beliefs. You don't have to understand or respect that, but I do. Above all else, he is not a corporate puppet. He has fought the Illuminati and New World Order, and kicked out the Rothschilds and their corrupt banks. He has even wrestled a lion that pounced on a baby, but in contrast, here's an interview with a German chancellor, who was deathly afraid of dogs, where he brought along his pet Labrador to intimidate her. Was that a cool thing to do? Not according to the uproar from feminists and the masses alike. Did that stop him? Heck no. He doesn't care what they think. Also relating to his image, is the fact that he served as a spy master in Russia's KGB for nearly a decade prior to acquiring any real interest in politics. Why is that relevant? For a multitude of reasons. It displays his lifelong, deep-rooted patriotism for Mother Russia and the extensive steps taken towards that goal. This is indicative of his ambition and rich character. His history in martial arts and spycraft espionage also invalidates all arguments that he's just a puppet with a handcrafted image created by PR staff. He's strong, intelligent and legitimate, and that is nearly impossible to find in current politics. In summation, he is exactly what Russia needs. His people have overwhelmingly voted for him not once or twice, but 3 times. He is a magnificent person and an even better leader. Long live great leader Vladimir Putin.